In terms of earnings, right? Well, I think it was about a week or so ago we had UL coming out and saying, look, you want guidance? Here's guidance, right? If this happens, this is what's going to happen to our business, right? But if that happens, this is what's going to happen to our business. I mean, this kind of, dual option thing, right? Is that what's going to be normalized for companies going forward until we see the tariff war resolved?
Yes, unfortunately, that uncertainty is creating kind of a double-edged sword, either positive or negative, again, depending on the path. And that's a problem because it's going to be difficult for companies to hire people, do new capital spending with this kind of uncertainty. Companies are the backbone of an economy. Even though the consumer is 2/3 of U.S. GDP, companies create jobs and pay wages. And if they're uncertain about the path, then it's going to be a headwind for both the job market and the capital spending cycle.
Certainly. So we're sort of in this position now where a lot of companies are basically almost paralyzed, right? They can't make any decisions that have to do with money. But from the earnings we've seen so far, and we're probably a little less than a fifth of the way through the earnings season for S&P 500 companies, right? Do you get the sense that at least some of them are showing signs that, yeah, they are able to pass on the increased costs to customers, or are intending to do that? And I note here you see probably average about 50% pass through in terms of these tariffs to their costs, right?
Exactly. And so there is some ability to push through higher prices, particularly for lower ticket items. What we're worried about is that that's a headwind to the lower middle income consumer. Tariffs are a regressive tax. It's bad policy. I understand the need to move forward on fair trade, but tariffs in the United States, to the extent companies are going to increase prices, even if it is only 50%, it's still significant, and at the end of the day, it's going to be a headwind for consumer spending, particularly that lower middle-income consumer. Yeah. And so it's again keeping a very bifurcated economy.
Sure. I mean, look, let's not talk about tax cuts or even deregulation. It's probably a second half, if not later, kind of story, right? Yeah. But for companies now to unlock themselves from this frozen position they're in right now, it's going to take, I think, one of two things, right? Either the tariff war has to resolve itself somehow or some way, and we may be in for a bit of a wait on that. Or the Fed's going to have to come to the rescue, right, the cavalry, and cut rates. I mean, we've been talking about this fight going on, or rather the president's attacks on Chair Powell to cut rates. He's digging in his heels and saying, look, no, my position is we need to see more evidence first before I actually have to act, right? What do you think is going to happen with the Fed? Because expectations are kind of all over the place, right? When do you think they may move next?
So it's important to remember, as you just suggested, they have already moved. Yeah. They have cut rates 100 basis points. And it takes about a year for the lagged effects of that Fed easing cycle to work its way into the economy. In December, we were somewhat optimistic on growth for 2025 because the Fed had started an easing cycle and because the administration was going to keep taxes low, et cetera. Fast forward to where we are today. Again, the reason the economy is deteriorating is because of the tariffs and the uncertainty and the government downsizing. It's not because interest rates are too high. And so it's not at all clear to us that cutting rates today would help the economy today. And we would worry that potentially that could create inflation, as we saw back in 2022.
So let me ask you, dual mandate, right? Full employment and price stability. Would it be fair to say that what the Fed is very much focused on right now is the price stability mandate?
Exactly. I think they learned their lesson, easing too aggressively in 2021, 2022, when the unemployment rate was coming down rapidly and there was a ton of fiscal stimulus. And so we think it's prudent, it's responsible for the Fed to, as they're doing, wait and see. This is a price shock. It's really not inflation, but if the Fed were to come in and ease too aggressively, they could create inflation down the road. And it's so important to remember the lagged effects of the easing cycle. We're going to lift growth here in 2025. We had the ISM clearly moving above 50 toward 50, 54 as we went through the year. That's not the reason the economy is stalling out.
The tariffs dropped, right?
Yeah, it's tariffs. It's not the Fed.
Absolutely. So, this whole issue of Fed independence, the president has backed down and said, no, I have no intention of firing Chair Powell. But, I mean, who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And, we've been talking to a lot of other guests who've been saying, look, he doesn't actually have to fire him, right? He only needs to give the perception that the Fed is susceptible to political influence, right, to do the damage. How do you see things playing off there, because you've got dollar already under pressure?
Yeah. It's not unusual for a president, particularly when the economy is deteriorating, from Reagan to Bush to
blame somebody else.
To blame somebody else for the problem. To be sure, Trump has been very aggressive on this, and it is encouraging that he did a total reversal. Was it 2 days ago?
Yeah.
So it is encouraging, and again, if anything, I would think this makes Powell more adamant in not moving too quickly until you do see a clear deterioration in the unemployment rate. Which, I mean, the unemployment rate is grinding a little higher, but it's not certainly bad enough for the Fed to move too quickly.
You think they could move in June next?
That's our policy person Benson's best guess is that they probably do move in June and probably only do two rate cuts this year.
Right. Now, something Sherry was talking about a couple of minutes ago, right? You're putting the odds of recession at 45%, and obviously if the tariff war either drags on or if tariffs go higher, that probability increases, right? What we've been talking about overnight, the news flow, to do with Secretary Besson and his comments about de-escalation. And there's a Wall Street Journal report as well, I'm sure you saw, right? And they put the number that they're working with at probably bringing tariffs down to 50%. I think that was the baseline for China. Yeah. If that does come through, what happens to those odds of recession? It comes down to...
I think it does come down. How much, again, the other tariffs will also matter. We need certainty. We need the negotiations to stop. We need to know where the end result is. And the administration did suggest earlier in the year that something around 50-60% might be the end game for China. Once we get that certainty in place, and not just with China, but the other tariffs, then odds of a recession, I would argue, would come down because of these other positives that are likely to flow through. More deregulation, which is starting, which is really important for small, medium-sized businesses. Increased odds of the tax, full extension of the tax cuts. That uncertainty will also start to disappear. So you could go into the fourth quarter again with the economy actually doing better. Tariffs are here; they're going to stick. Let's get just some uncertainty to take away some of that uncertainty, and then I think the economy, from the lagged effects of the Fed easing cycle and those other forces, growth could turn up as we move into 2026.